In this video module, we'll be looking at installing the MariaDB or the MySQL DB, the database server applications that we'll use for the course. And in terms of an overview, there we go. First thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about what MariaDB versus MySQL. I've given you the two websites there that host the two applications. We're going to go through an installation example, and then we're going to do some cleanup by adding the executable to the path. We'll talk about what that is and my.cnf, and then we'll create and populate an initial database that we'll use during the semester. First up, I want to spend a couple of seconds talking about the MariaDB versus MySQL DB, and as I said, you have the two web pages here. So let me just jump over there, and here's the MySQL web page, and we're going to use one of these, one or the other of these. We don't need both. I'm going to use MariaDB. You're certainly free to use MySQL. MySQL is an open source database product. It's been around for quite some time and used to be the most popular database in use. I'm not sure whether that's still true or not, but a few years ago it was purchased by Oracle, and some people in the community are questioning what the long-term viability as an open source project. And so the original developers forked the code and created MariaDB, which is, as they say, dedicated to open source. You can read all about it here on the About MariaDB page if you're interested. As I said, either one of these will work for our course. They're functionally, at least for what we're going to be doing in our class, they're functionally equivalent, so either one will work. As I said, I'm going to use MariaDB, and so let's go through the example installation process. And so we would come through the initial download page. When you go to the download page, it's asking which one you want, gives you a little bit more information about sponsors and so on. So I'm just going to go to the download page, and then you can choose which series you want. Of course, I choose the most recent stable series. Go there, and then for your particular platform. So I use the MSI installations, and so I want the 64-bit Windows install. So I'm just going to choose that, and then waiting for the response. It's going to ask me, do I want to donate? And then eventually it will come up to what do you want to do. So we would save the file, and you can see here it's saving.1, so I've already saved it, so I'm going to cancel that out and then tab over to my installation. Oop, it's not open, so let me just go here to my Explorer, downloads, and you can see the two. I'm just going to delete this one because I'd overwritten it. And so there's the installation file. So I'm going to double click on my installation file to start the installation, and it's a fairly standard installation process. So let's just go through and accept the terms of the GNU public license. We're just going to accept all of the defaults here. And the first thing you have to do is specify the password for the root database user. And so this is something that you should do uniquely on your computer. Choose whatever you like. Make sure that you remember this. For the purposes of demonstration, I'm just going to make this Jeff, J-E-F-F, and I'm going to confirm E-F-F. And then you can decide if you want to enable remote access or not. I typically do, but I only do this because this is solely my machine and I use it. I don't allow other people to have access. So then it's going to ask a couple of other questions that we can just generally take the default. We have a service that runs in the background. We have an enabling port so that you can have networking and so on. So we're going to just choose that. And then if you want to provide feedback submitting anonymous information, click the box. Otherwise, just click next. It's collected all the information, and now it's ready to install. So I'm going to install that, and then I will be back on the video once that's finished. Okay, so we're back. You can see the installation completed. So I'm just going to click finish, and the installation is done. So let's check the installation. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the Windows key, and we should see recently added here the command prompt with MariaDB. You can also scroll down, and it should have, let's see, I didn't check this, but it should have created, there we go, it created a separate directory, and you can see the command prompt and the MySQL client. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to click on the command prompt, and you can see that it opens a Windows command prompt. And so to test this, the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to try the default MySQL, and we're going to get an access denied because it doesn't understand. It's using my username from Windows on the local host, so we have to tell the database server the root password that we created. So to do that, we're just going to do MySQL u space root -p, then hit enter, and then it asks for the password. And so here's where you enter the root password that you gave, so during the installation. So I'm just going to type in Jeff, and now here we are. So we have what's called the MariaDB prompt, and we don't have a database. So we can just show databases. Oops. All commands are terminated with a semicolon. And you can see that we have some default ones created during the installation, but we don't have at this point any user databases. So the first thing that I want to do before we talk about how to create and populate an initial database, I want to talk about two things. First of all, adding the exe path to the path environment variable. As you see, when I created this command, when I opened the command prompt, this is a dedicated MariaDB command prompt, and this is perfectly fine if this is how you want to use the application. On the other hand, what I typically do is I want to add the executable file to the system path. And so let me show you really quickly how to do that in case you want to do that, which will then allow you to access MySQL from any command prompt, not just the dedicated MariaDB. So the first thing we need to do is find the application. So I'm going to, Alt-Tab over to my File Explorer, and then I'm going to just look for the application. So I'm going to go to this PC, WinC, Program Files, and here's my MariaDB 10.3, and I want to look for the bin directory. And so here's the MySQL application right here. So you can just see it, mysql.exe. And so what I need to do if I want to access this from anywhere is I need to put this path, C:\program files MariaDB 10.3 bin, on the system path. So I'm just going to copy that. So just right click and click on copy. Then I'm going to hit again the Windows key and type environment for environment variables. And so you can see it comes up, edit system environment variables. Do that. Down here at the bottom, near the bottom, we have an environment variables. Click there. And then we have two options. One is for the user. You can see the little path there. But I'm going to set it for the system because, again, this is my computer and nobody else uses it. So I want, no matter who I'm logged in as, whether it's me or an administrator or something else, I want that to be accessible. So I'm going to edit the path. You can see all of the path entries here. And what I want to do is create a new entry. And then I'm just going to paste it in what we copied to the clipboard. And so now at the very bottom we have C program files MariaDB 10.3. Click enter. Click OK. Click OK. Click OK. And now I'm going to go to just a standard prompt, a standard command prompt. So this is not the MariaDB, and I'm going to execute MySQL u root p. Oops, I forgot to restart this, so let me exit that one and restart and try the same thing again. So I just open a new command prompt. When you edit the command prompt, the path variable, if you have a command prompt open, it doesn't inherit the new path. So I had to close that command prompt and open a new one. So let's do that. Let's try the same thing I just tried, MySQL u root p, and then Jeff. And so now I'm here. And now, because I put it on the system path, I have access from any command prompt. I have access to the MariaDB. So the next thing I want to spend a couple seconds talking about is a file, an optional file called my.cnf. And so this is my configuration file. And note that this is optional, and I would never do this unless I was on my own computer that nobody else uses, because essentially what I'm going to show is how we can give access to the user accounts without typing any information in. So let me just jump back over here to where our command prompt. And so remember, when we want to start MySQL, we have this MySQL u root p, so tell it the root user and tell it the password. And so if we forget that and just type MySQL, we get an access denied because it doesn't recognize this as a user. So what the configuration file my.cnf does is it pre-specifies the username and credentials so that you don't have to type it in every time, and so it just simplifies your life a little bit. So let's do that really quick. Again, this is optional. If I was on a shared computer, I wouldn't do this. First thing to note is where it goes. So the file's going to go in the root directory of your main drive, which is typically the C drive. Now on a typical Windows installation, this is a protected directory, so you can't just open files there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the Windows key again and go to search for Notepad. There's Notepad, but instead of just opening it, I'm going to right click again and say, okay, I want to run as administrator. That's going to then give me permissions to access that directory. And so if you want to do this, what you basically do is you create a client section by typing client inside brackets. So that's creating a client section of the configuration file. And I'm going to type user root password and whatever password you chose. And so I'm creating the configuration file and just saying always use user root and always use password Jeff. So I'm going to then save this. Note when you use Notepad, it tries to save everything as a .text, so you need to get rid of that. Just say all files and then go back to Windows C. Oops, I was already on Windows C, so let me go back to where I already was, right here. And then my.cnf, my.configuration. And so now when we go back here, my.cnf, there it is, there's my configuration file. And now when I type just MySQL, it automatically goes to that file, and you don't have to do the root dash password. You can also use other usernames. We're going to create some other usernames later on in the semester, and you'll see all of that. So you don't have to use the root password. This just gives you a way to do the default without having to type it. So the last thing I want to do in this video is I want to create and populate an initial database. Now when we get to this section in the class, we'll talk a lot about what's going on here and the syntax and all of that. So for the time being, I just want to show you how to do this, and the files will be available to you, and then we'll come back and discuss all the details a little bit later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of MariaDB here. I'm just going to navigate to the location of the files. And so again, this is going to be depending on your computer, where you download and put the files. Just happens to be the directory where I store them. And so I'm interested in two files, create database.sql and insy6500.sql. And these things will be accessible to you through this initial database.zip. So let's have a look at those two files. So the first one creates the database, and you can see it's a very simple file. We have a drop database if exists, so if the database is already there, it'll delete it. Then it creates it, so essentially recreating it. Then I'm creating a user. Note that I have the user insy6500 at localhost, identified by insy6500. So this is essentially creating a database user, insy6500, and assigning that user password insy6500. When you create your database, you're free to change these to whatever you want. Just make sure that you remember the username and the password, because those are the things that you're going to use to access the database. You can also use your own username and password and then go put those in, I don't have it open, the my.configuration file. So this would be the user and this would be the password if you'd rather use this username than the root. Then it's going to grant some privileges. Again, we'll talk about what this means a little bit later in the semester, but it essentially is a permissions function. So to implement this, I'm going to go back. Again, here's my file. So I'm just going to type MySQL and then pipe or redirect create database. So this is saying I'm going to execute MySQL, and then I'm going to redirect this file into the MySQL program. I hit enter, and everything should work just like this. If you get an error, then we'll have to see what that error is. So I've just gone through this process of creating the database. Note that if I didn't have the my.cnf, I can still do this. I just have to specify the user. So I would do user root p, right? And that's saying open MySQL and use this username and password and pipe that, redirect that, and now it's going to ask me for my password, Jeff. So you can see the benefit here of using my.cnf is that you don't have to continually type the uroot-p every time you want to access the database. So if we go in now and say just go MySQL, and then I'm going to use INSY 6500. Now you can see that we changed the database. Instead of having none here, we have INSY 6500. I'm going to say show tables. Oops, show tables. And we have no tables. So we've basically at this point created an empty database. The second part and the final part here is let's put some initial data in. And so I've given you a file which is a database dump from a file that I use in our undergraduate class that just has a couple of tables and some relationships that we'll use through the semester. And so to import all of this data into the database we just created, we use the following syntax. MySQL. This time I'm going to specify the database that I just created, INSY 6500. And then redirect the initial, INSY 6500. So I'm going to do MySQL, specify the database, the redirect operator, and then redirect this file. Hit enter. Takes a little while. There are a few tables here. And so now we have successfully created the database and populated it with some sample data. So if I go back, do MySQL, and this time let's put INSY 6500 on the command line. So I start the client, specify the database, and now in one step I've got the access to the database. Now I go back and execute the same show tables command, and there we go. So these tables, airplane, album, artist, and so on, were created when we redirected the SQL file into our existing database. So at this point, we have everything installed that we're going to use through the semester. So I'd encourage you to give this a try and experiment, and let me know if you run into any installation problems.